After Elise Stefanik drops out of the race for New York governor, President Trump endorses Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman. Who is he, and does he have a serious shot at beating the Democratic incumbent governor, Kathy Hochul?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleague on the editorial page, columnist Kim Strassel. What a roller coaster of a year it has been for New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. She stepped down from the House leadership earlier this year in expectation of becoming President Trump's ambassador to the United Nations. But that nomination was pulled, given the narrowness of the GOP's House majority, when there became worries that Speaker Mike Johnson might need her vote in order to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Then after announcing a run for governor in early November, last week she called it quits and even announced that she won't run for re-election to Congress. She cited the entry into the governor's race of a fellow Republican seeking the nomination, that is Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman. Here's a piece of what Stefanik said on social media. As we have seen in past elections, while we would have overwhelmingly won this primary, it is not an effective use of our time or your generous resources to spend the first half of next year in an unnecessary and protracted Republican primary, especially in a challenging state like New York, unquote. Kim, what do you make of this? What a wild ride here this year for Elise Stefanik.
Yeah, not just this year. I mean, the evolution of Elise Stefanik is kind of fascinating. When she first got into Congress, she would definitely have been a member that I would have put more in that vague definition of the moderate caucus. Upstate New York, a blue state, I would have put her more in the category of maybe a Mike Lawler or, some of these Congress people from tougher districts in New York, New Jersey, California. She then became a very fierce ally of Donald Trump and a big adherent of the MAGA movement. And it really propelled her both in recognition and also kind of rocketed her up the ladder. She became a member of the Republican House leadership. I think the only woman there for a time. Really even kind of further enhanced her profile this past year because remember, she was at the epicenter of calling in all of these university presidents and really grilling them over anti-Semitic tolerances on these campuses. Those hearings were extremely well watched and I think made Elise Stefanik a little bit more of a household name. So then she gets, at the beginning of this year, she was nominated to become the UN ambassador. And look, I think we can get into this. There's a lot of criticism right now of Donald Trump and loyalty, and there's no question he kind of threw under the bus. But she stepped up to be his ambassador. And then as time went on and it realized that the Republican House caucus was going to be very, very narrow, the majority, they decided to pull that nomination so that she could stay in the House. They wanted to make sure they had the votes they needed for reconciliation. Because of the fact that how this all happened, she didn't end up with her House leadership post anymore. She was given this kind of nominal title instead. And the kind of repayment for all this, the understood, as it were, was that when she went and she was going to go run for higher office, that, in appreciation for everything that she had done, she was going to have Trump's backing. And then Bruce Blakeman got in and all of a sudden Donald Trump says, well, I like both of them. You guys choose. And I think she was blindsided by that. It is a lesson, if anyone needed one again, that with Donald Trump, loyalty runs one way. You must be loyal to him and he'll decide what he's going to do whenever he decides what he's going to do. But whether frustration for that, or there might have been other reasons, and this is an excuse, she's now essentially withdrawing from politics. And I thought that was the interesting aspect of this announcement, Kyle, was not just that she wasn't going to be in the governor's bid anymore, but she was also retiring from Congress too. And she's a fairly young and, like I said, well-known political figure.
Not yet a household name as much as Bruce Blakeman, this Nassau County executive. Let's listen to a piece of him announcing his campaign for governor a couple weeks ago.
I made Nassau County the safest county in America. We're one of the most prosperous counties in America. I cut taxes. I haven't raised taxes a penny in 4 years. We've created economic prosperity. Our poverty rate is 1/3 of the poverty rate of the state of New York. She's the one that's been a failure. I'm running for office to make people more prosperous, to make them safer, and to make New Yorkers happy again.
Right. And the primary is not going to be easy. The general is not going to be easy because we know Elise Stefanik is formidable as well. But you're willing to take that challenge.
Absolutely. I'm ready for the fight. And I'm going to fight for New Yorkers. I'm going to make sure that we do have economic prosperity. I'm fighting for your children and your grandchildren so that they have a bright future. We're going to create prosperity. We're going to make New York safer. We're going to make it the Empire State again.
That was audio from Fox and Friends, and a good place for Blakeman to be if he wants to become more of a household name among Republican voters. A couple points about Blakeman, 70 years old. He was elected Nassau County executive in 2021, pretty narrowly, and then reelected this past November. Nassau County, for those not in New York, is the county on Long Island that is just to the east of New York City, just to the east of Queens. Blakeman is talking about running against Hochul on energy, opposing her, quote, green energy scam, talking about support for drilling of natural gas, pipelines coming into New York, says he wants to lower taxes. And notably, he is pro-choice. So he said in an interview with the New York Post recently that he thinks that would be politically helpful, saying that it takes the abortion issue off the table. I'm a pro-choice Republican. It will help attract independent women, unquote. So that is a bit about Blakeman. Kim, what do you make of him as a political prospect in New York writ large?
Well, while pointing out that I have absolutely nothing against Bruce Blakeman, I think this could prove a big political costly error for Republicans. Overall, Hochul is vulnerable. She should be vulnerable. She's, it's been a terrible couple of years for New York under her. People are very concerned about Mamdani in this election, what she might do next under pressure from progressives. And yes, Blakeman won re-election in November. From all accounts, he's done a good job as Nassau County executive. But he isn't well known like Elise Stefanik is, especially in the upstate. And by the way, that is where Republicans really have to be excited and turn out if they want to have, any chance of electing a Republican governor in the state. I mean, New York, you can elect Republicans to statewide office. It has done it in a while. The left has had more of a grip on that office of late, and so it's going to be a bit of a lift. So you need to have big turnout in upstate and in suburban New York. He just isn't. He isn't extremely well known. That's going to be a question too when it comes to donors and money. And Hochul's going to have a huge campaign chest. The other reason that I worry about this is if he turns out that he's not much of a competitive threat. And we'll begin to find out here soon. The polls will start to come in and people will either focus on him or he'll kind of be written off as not a serious contender. Even if he isn't, the pressure comes off her too. If she feels as though her office is at risk, she's going to have to try to court those suburban voters and upstate and maybe push off some of the progressive demands that are being led by Mamdani on taxes and rent control and union domination of schools. But if she feels that there's no real threat to her reelection, she's going to feel free to cave to all of those. So I worry about this, not just from, GOP election prospects and the cause of free markets and good policy, but what that means for New York State too.
President Trump has now endorsed Blakeman in a Truth Social post saying he is highly respected, MAGA all the way. Bruce Blakeman is a fantastic guy, all caps on fantastic in the usual Trump style. Notable also that Kathy Hochul's campaign seems to be sending the exact same message, pointing out or arguing that Blakeman, quote, cheered on Trump's tariffs, according to a campaign spokesperson, saying this: "We're not about to let him turn the governor's mansion into Mar-a-Lago North," unquote. So both sides there making President Trump and Blakeman's support for President Trump an issue potentially in this campaign. I want to point to a Siena University poll from last week that polled Stefanik and Blakeman both against the incumbent governor, Kathy Hochul. And in a Hochul-Stefanik matchup, Hochul led 49-30 with 20% undecided. So that was a pretty big gap, but even bigger for Hochul over Bruce Blakeman, 50% to 25% with 21% undecided. Kim, maybe Blakeman will be able to make up some of that ground as people get to know him better. It does seem to me like the things that there are pros that Stefanik would have that he does not, including, as you mentioned, her ability to galvanize Republicans and raise money, even money from out of state, from supporters who wanted her to have a real shot at defeating Hochul. On the other hand, Hochul has not exactly triangulated, I think. So she is now tiptoeing again toward the idea of raising taxes, potentially to help fund some of this Zohran Mamdani agenda in New York City. She recently said that she wants income taxes to be off the table because she's concerned about the cost of living, but suggesting maybe that she would be open to some corporate tax increases in New York. And so, Kim, I do agree that she ought to be vulnerable in this race, even though New York is a very tough state for Republicans. One question, I guess, is whether Blakeman will be able to mount the kind of sustained, galvanizing challenge that you really need to knock off an incumbent Democratic governor in a state like New York.
Well, and a big part of this also, Kyle, might just end up being the broader environment for Republicans, right? I mean, and that's what we see sometimes in these blue states, is that that's when the GOP has the biggest opportunity, when the party's riding a high. And that brings up an excellent question, which is, there's been a lot of talk about Trump not endorsing Elise Stefanik outright. She certainly alluded to that in her message getting out. But I think it's a legitimate question to ask whether or not she's looking at those polls. She's looking what these other special elections that we had this last year. Republicans have not had a good run of it. There's a lot of evidence. You look at the Trump approval ratings that he's falling among some really important categories. The GOP is going to need to do a lot more when it comes to an economic agenda. Healthcare costs are rising. I mean, and Americans tend to blame the party that's in power. So they've got a challenge ahead of them in this next year. And you have to ask yourself, if Elise Stefanik didn't look at this environment and say, this was not the right year to be doing this. And now I've got my excuse. I can jump out of this race. Blakeman's in. And, it could well be, quite aside from Blakeman and his prospects, it might answer the other interesting question that I certainly had about Elise Stefanik, which is whether or not, yes, she certainly pointed out and was frustrated by, you kind of saw that in the statement she put out, that she didn't get an outright endorsement for Trump. And there's a lot of talk about that and whether or not he did enough for her. But it could have just been that she looked around and said, hey, you know what? This is not the year to be doing this. She is a young politician. She's ambitious. And because she's young, she'll still have plenty more opportunities if she wants to get back into politics. She might have looked around and said, hey, maybe a Senate run in a couple of years, or maybe try the governor's run again in 2030 when things might look better. But I think that this is a hard question for Blakeman and the ultimate nominee because especially in a blue state, you need those kind of headwinds behind Republicans to have a real shot at winning. And in the years where it's the opposite, where it could be Democrats who look ascendant, it just makes the hill that much harder to climb.
Well, if that's the strategy for Stefanik, discretion being the better part of valor in a midterm 2026 when President Trump is in the Oval Office. I mean, a Senate run is an interesting idea because, of course, Chuck Schumer is up for reelection in 2028. A lot of talk on the Democratic side about whether Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez might mount a primary challenge to him. So that would be one potential opportunity for Stefanik, who is only 41 years old, so could get back into politics here and still have a long future ahead of her. On the point about the headwinds for Republicans in 2026, one countervailing wind would be Mamdani coming into office here, preparing to be sworn in January as the mayor of New York City. And I guess I would still put that in the open question category, because one way you could imagine a Republican winning New York State is for the mayor of New York to be sworn in as a proud Democratic socialist and to go mucking about in politics in a way that causes real headaches for residents of New York City, causes them to flee. I mean, if Mamdani creates a real sort of crime problem in New York, you could imagine voters who are Democrats or independents, but are not typical Republican voters saying, we need a counterweight in Albany. You know, Mamdani is talking about raising taxes, about doing sorts of things that require help from Albany, and we need somebody in Albany who will stand up and say no to him. That is one imaginable way that you get a Republican candidate to win a New York governor's race. Kim, I mean, the tea leaves there, I guess I'm not sure quite how to read them. I mean, Mamdani has convinced the New York Police Commissioner, Jessica Tisch, to stay. I'm still waiting to see the real details about what how they came eye to eye on that agreement, whether she has agreed to some kind of sending social workers to certain police calls policy. That's something that Mamdani promised on the campaign trail. So I guess we'll have to wait till January to see how that shakes out.
Well, let's put it this way. Republicans certainly viewed Mamdani's election as one of their greatest political fortunes of the past year, which is telling you something. They were rooting for him all the way. And you can see why, because one question, as you point out, Kyle, is his actual on the ground governance. Not just does he make those errors that you're talking about, and everything that he has set down and said is one of his ambitions, we know from history is a terrible idea. So if he is going to go ahead with that agenda, now let's see, maybe he'll modulate some. As you note, he kept on Jessica Tisch. Maybe he's going to be more pragmatic than he certainly sounded on the campaign trail and what he promised. I somehow find that difficult to believe. And again, we know from history how these policies end up. So things are going to look tougher in New York. And then the question is, does he drag Kathy Hochul along, with him? Is she made complicit in that? And do they become this kind of twin force that Republicans can then campaign against? Because this is the way of politics. And you heard, you read the Kathy Hochul statement saying, bring it on. Bruce Blakeman's just going to be an extension of Donald Trump. And we're going to make sure Donald Trump doesn't take over New York. Well, the vice versa of that is that Republicans want a figurehead to express all of what they're saying about the risks of socialism and liberal governance. And Mamdani seems as good of a boogeyman as anyone. And he's, got a very prominent election. So, I mean, that could be, and you're right, I can't read the tea leaves on this either, but that is going to be working in Blakeman's favor to a certain extent, especially if things go as we expect.
One final thought for me, and then I'll give you the last word, Kim, is I think maybe there's a risk of overreading, speaking of Mamdani, his recent visit to the Oval Office, where he and Trump were a bit of a comedy duo. The reporter asking, "Do you still think Donald Trump is a fascist?" And Donald Trump saying, "It's okay. You can say yes." To my mind, President Trump is always gracious when he's meeting with people one-on-one, I think. But as soon as Mamdani gets into office and starts enacting these policies, I understand why, if you were in the Stefanik camp, you might have been a little bit piqued by that Oval Office greeting. But as soon as Mamdani gets into office and starts enacting these policies, I think he will go straight back to being a foil for Republicans and for President Trump. I don't think we've heard the last on Truth Social of Kami Mamdani.
Yeah, I mean, put me in the camp. I had a very different read of why Mamdani wanted that meeting. It wasn't about making friends, and it wasn't about, like, I thought it might be initially, and some others thought this too, it might be a kind of staged opportunity to maybe lambaste Trump or embarrass him. Instead, everyone came out, nice headlines. And that was when it dinged for me. I think what's going on here is Mamdani wants to be left alone to do exactly what he wants to do in New York. And put the politics aside, Republicans using him as their sort of poster boy of everything that's wrong with progressive politics. There has been, and there remains, a very real threat to his governance because of interference by the federal government. Politico actually had a really interesting story this week about how effective the Trump administration has been at absolutely derailing California's EV plans. Its plans to not just implement EVs across the state in a very short period of time, but also this kind of grip that they had on Detroit, because California has so much economic muscle, being such a big state. It was kind of dictating what kind of cars everyone could get across the country. And so they overturned California's, the Congress actually stepped in and restricted California's ability to do this by having a very novel way of looking at a Congressional Review Act procedure. And this was all planned. The administration wanted to do it, and it wanted to make sure that California wasn't going to get its way. Trump has a lot of ways that he could intervene in New York that made it difficult for Mamdani to engage in his full progressive nirvana plans. And I think he just was trying to get him out, like, leave me, we're cool, right? We're cool. Just you do your thing and I'll do my thing. And I think that's what he got by the end for now. Okay. It wouldn't necessarily take much for Trump to go right back to, assuming the worst of him and them calling each other's names, and then game on. We'll see what happens. But I still think that there's a very real possibility, like noted, that he's going to unleash, especially without any federal interference, the full Mamdani platform. And New York will be one of the funner races, governor races, to watch this year.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back later this week with another edition of Potomac Watch.